Okay, time to go live. And time to turn on a bit of music. Everything's running, everything's okay. Perfect. Well then, welcome everyone. I'm just gonna post a comment and pin it. Just in case anyone has a question, they can always tag me and I can more easily see it. Let's see. All right. All ready to go. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. This is probably going to be the last live stream that I'm gonna do in a while. Also because it's the last one for Snow. And I want to move on to some other projects in the coming weeks. Especially now that the Sprite Fright Open movie is almost done as well. But yeah, I did a bit more tweaks on this character in between streams. Just changing some values a bit, tweaking the hair shader and all that stuff, but nothing major. It's still all what I've been showing in the previous live streams. Oh wow, although this is a bit weird. Okay, I'm gonna fix this. Hold on. Just so I remember. Okay. So, see the first question. This isn't the real Blender YouTube channel, right? It is. It is a different YouTube channel from Blender. So there's Blender actually has multiple different YouTube channels. It's Blender, which is just the general one. Then there's Blender Developers, which is very specific to the development of Blender and any new features. And usually also live streams from Sergey, where he's actually coding Blender live, which I can actually recommend to watch. Just more on the development side. And then there's the Blender Studio, which is more on the side of the artists, the people who are at Blender who are making movies and creative content and educational material. Something like that. And then there's another one called Blender Cloud, but it's basically the same as the Blender Studio. Also, I see another question. Hi, Julian. You have any info about Pablo Dobarro leaving Blender development? What's happening now with the sculpting tools? Well, I mean, all of that is still being discussed. We're like all talking with each other on how we continue. But yeah, Pablo Dobarro is for now doing some other things, which doesn't mean he's not doing any Blender development anymore. He's still available. But yeah, not much info out yet about that. Sorry about that. Anyway, there's more comments coming in. Is Snow going to have phenomens in rigs? I come from Maya background, and all 3 rigs have some kind of oh, right. For all for lip syncing, probably not. If anything, I mean, I could see it being added easily with the new pose library. So, I mean, I could mention that, but usually they just come very blank with you get the rig with all the features, but there's no poses already included. Maybe that can change now. That would be nice. Anyway, my plan for this stream is to essentially finish the shaders. So I'm gonna bake all the textures down, because right now, if I go to the shading workspace, it is very much, it's working for both Eevee and cycles. I cleaned up the materials a bit, so it's all working fine. Also, let me just quickly go in here and toggle off transparency. There we go. So yeah, pretty similar results. But the thing with characters is you're not always using them in one specific software. And I could imagine that people might want to use Rain or Snow also as an export to another engine, another software. It could happen. and I want to make that available. So right now I have this whole node tree that is creating these materials, and to make this possible to be used in other software, it would be nice to bake it down into a set of PBR textures. So that's something I would want to do now, or at least get a bit into. And then I want to also get into the final renders for the presentation. Like, it's always nice to kind of present your character once it's done with some nice renders. So I want to make a lighting setup and a little bit of a comp setup, similar to the one that I did for Rain a couple years back. So I did already do a bit of a cleanup, and so the nodes network is a bit easier to understand. There's like all of the mixing of the base color that's happening here, the subsurface scattering color, the roughness, the subsurface scattering values, and then just like some random other node systems. But what I did is like, what easily happens is that you have all of these different, like I'm doing kind of a layered approach to making materials in Blender. It's like somewhat similar to what you would have in Photoshop or Substance Painter, where like you create these different inputs like masks, and then you reuse them for the base color, for the roughness, for the bump, height, whatever, subsurface scattering. And in a node system, what that leads to is that you have all of these connections, these little guys, just going all over the place. Like they connect over here and down there, and you just have a big cable salad of inputs and outputs. So eventually, like I would start to simplify this a bit. So, for example, I have this value over here. Hold on. If I isolate this, so this is the lip detail. It's like a simple mask that I was using for the roughness, for the diffuse color, for different parts of the material. And I just grouped this. I selected all of the, like if I open this up, like I had this part of the node network, and this output would just go into like multiple different inputs in the node tree. And instead I just grouped this into this little group node then. And you could see that this is also being used over, over here, down there. So instead of having like a node group up here that would then just connect like down here and then down here, and you have all of these lines crossing each other, it's just, I just duplicate this node group over here and over here. It's the same thing, but it just makes everything look a bit cleaner. So then in the end, it's all coming together over here. And by the way, if you didn't know it, you can name these little connection spots. Like if you just shift, right click, drag, you can make these little connections. You can select them and you can name them. So I could select this one and call this one connection. And now it has a little name. So that's actually really useful in cleaning this up. So now I have these little parts over here. I could even group them into their own little, not group them, but frame them with Shift P. And now there's a little frame around them. So I know that all of these little, all of these node systems will eventually land back here into the base color, subsurface scattering color, and roughness. Makes it a bit easier to understand what's going on in the material. I'm going to get to the questions in a moment. The last thing that I left in here is 2 little node frames for the UV grid for just visualization. I can just at any point check out the UVs by just Control-Shift clicking on this node, and then I have it here. I can change out the UV map, which I want to show, like that. And I can also Control-Shift click. Control-Shift click on anything else. Click on this texture for baking, and I will get into that in a moment. Before I explain anything more about the material, I'll just actually go quickly over the comments. So there was the question, you know the creator of Blender, Don Rosendahl? I've seen videos where they show that he's Dutch. I'm Dutch too, so it's pretty cool if that's right. Yeah, he's a very tall Dutch guy. And yeah, I know him because he's my boss. So we're basically working basically 2 rooms away from each other. So yeah, there's a bunch of Dutch people here at the Blender, working at Blender or for Blender, but overall it's a pretty international organization. I mean, I'm living here in Amsterdam at the headquarters of Blender. So yeah, it's very Dutch. Which GPU are you using? I see someone ask. You can find more of the hardware specs in the description of the video. Oh, hey, Falk. Nice of you to join us. Okay. Yeah, the chat is pretty lively today. Thanks for joining, everyone. But I want... maybe you already noticed it in the thumbnail of the video. One of the things, once I get into like actually making renders, is I want to render out not just the actual, like, hold on, let me change the camera. I don't just want to render out this part, like just the final materials, final model, and then just like have him spin around in a turntable, which is like a great way of showing off your character model, especially in pose. I want to also have more, have some nice renders over, let's see. Hold on. Ah, here it is. I want to have some nice render of having him without textures, without materials, all that stuff. Or having him with wires enabled. And having this actually in cycles or in Eevee, which is actually kind of tricky to pull off. Like, if you've ever tried to add wireframes in your shaders, the first thing you might result to, you try to do is, let me just actually pin this real quick. You might actually want to try to add a wireframe node over here. And if I just quickly show how this looks like, it's actually kind of messy. I think now it's not looking that good because of the size of the wireframe. So let me make that a bit smaller. Yes. So it's creating wireframes on top of the entire shader, but they're triangulated, which is not great. Like, you don't want to have it triangulated. So the alternative solution, usually what people resort to, is to just enable overlays over here in the viewport and just enable the wireframe overlay, which is also a fine solution. Like, with this, you can actually show wires. You could go to the camera view and then just make a viewport render, and there you would have the wireframes on top. But this would often result in these clipping issues. Like, you can see it over here on the shirt. There's 2 objects right on top of each other, and the camera wouldn't be able to really identify what's on top and what's below if they're too close to each other and the camera is too far away. So it's actually not that pretty. And what I ended up doing instead is, instead of using this wireframe overlay, is I started making this wireframe shader node network. And the way how, like, you can see how this is just adding these wires in the diffuse and in the roughness of the material. It's actually, it's like it's painted on top. And I can show you how this works. It's actually not too complicated. Like, let's actually just focus a bit on the head. So all of the materials in the end culminate to this part over here. I got the base, I got the base color, I got the subsurface scattering value, I got the subsurface scattering color, and then I got the roughness. For the skin, I actually didn't even use a bump map or anything, but these are the most important textures. Now, to get this kind of clay result, which I can toggle on over here, that basically strips it of all of the textures, I plug these in here. Like, I have an extra node group in between these final colors and the shader. So this is called group clay. So I have little inputs over here for the diffuse color. I have an input over here for the value 60% and the value 0%. And what this does is it just puts it into this node group, plugs it into a mix node, and then just replaces the color completely. So the diffuse color gets plugged in here. So the color goes in here, and then it gets plugged in here. And whether this factor is set to 1 or 0, it gets replaced or not replaced with this gray over here. And then the subsurface scattering value, I can just plug this into this spot, this slot that I called 0, or 0.0. What this does is it plugs it through here, it pipes it through this mix node, and if this is set to 0, it will just pass through, nothing will change. If it's set to 1, it will replace the values completely with black, with 0. And the same for 0.6 over here. And what this does is if I change this property value over here to 1, which is actually like I just created this on this empty over here, and then I right-clicked on this value and I said copy as driver. I have an entire tutorial online on what drivers do, but they essentially copy the values from somewhere else. So if this is set to 1, then this is set to 1. If this is set to 0, then these are all setting to 0. And you can hook these up by right-clicking on any value anywhere in Blender, saying copy as new driver, and then right-clicking on another value and saying paste driver. And then this will turn purple to indicate that this is now being driven by this other value. So this is basically how I could, on every single object, every single material on the entire character, I can just immediately replace all these colors and values at the same time by just changing this one value. And then the same thing happens over here with wire, where like if I have wire on, then it would put a wireframe on top of everything. And I can explain a bit on how this wireframe actually works. So essentially, I have created a UV map on all of these objects called wire. You can call it anything that you want, but what this wire UV is just, I just created a new UV map, and then pressed U and clicked on reset. What this does is it actually, I can show this over here. If I select the right UV map, if I can find it. There it is. Interesting. Oh, overlays is off. Okay, so just all of the faces of the model, it will just take up the entire 1 by 1 UV space. So every single face would show the entire texture that I have over here, as an example. Now, the reason why this is so useful is that I can now see exactly where each face ends and where it starts. These are coordinates, after all, UV coordinates. So if I now, let me show you. So I have the UVs over here. This is how they look like. They go from like red to yellow, I guess, white. Yeah, it's basically like all of these coordinates. I can separate them. like with a separate RGB node. And then I have the red channel and the green channel. The blue channel doesn't do anything. But here you can see a black to white gradient in both directions. Now this is how we generate the UVs, because I can now plug, for example, the red channel. I can plug this into a greater than node, and then based on this value over here, I can define where, like, if the value is greater than this value, then it's white. If it's not, then it's black. So this way I get this part of the gradient over here. And then I plug this also in a greater than this low value over here. So, and I can then have both sides over here. I invert this one. So I have a black line over here and a black line over here. I multiply them on top of each other. And then I basically did the same thing with the other gradient and multiply that one on top of each other. And now I have all of these different lines actually multiplied together, which gives me a full wireframe of all of the different faces. What I can then do is just make it a bit more gray, like with this color ramp. I just made it, instead of black, a bit more gray, and then I multiply it on top of the diffuse color. And now I have it on top. And this is how I basically add wireframes on top of my model. And then together with all the other inputs, it's right there. The only disadvantage of using this method of adding wireframes to your models via a shader is that based on the density of the mesh, the wireframes are going to get thicker or thinner. But I would actually say that's a good thing, because if you have a very dense mesh, you would want the wires to be a little bit thinner, so that you can actually see them, and not that like the entire mesh suddenly gets drowned out in black, which is actually what happens if you would just use the wireframe overlay. And I would just like change this to single white. Like at some point, if you zoom out over here, it would just get drowned out. It would just become black. So you can actually prevent that a bit by using the shader, and instead the wires just get thinner. I also see a question. Interesting method for wireframes. Only really works on quads, right? No, it works on any face. Like if you would have basically like if I go into the, like over here I only have quads, but I can also go into the head, and apparently, because I don't even know which face this is, to be honest, but I have a hexagon, a pentagon somewhere. So I have one n-gon. I would like to figure out where this one is. Okay, so it's actually right over here. Okay, and you can see even with an n-gon, it still works. It also would appear on triangles, basically any face that you have. So it just works. And I just added it on every single object, so you can see wireframes all over the place, in cycles and in Eevee. The one thing I actually wanted to fix over here is that I'm noticing that for some reason oh, yeah. Didn't use the right roughness for the soul. Okay, so that's fixed. The great thing is, now that I already have this turntable set up, like I can just render out these turntables in pose with wireframes, or with all the textures gone, and it's gonna look great side by side. Like if I just quickly go to would be actually great to show where I'm going with this. If I go to the Blender Cloud, there's more material on there. Training, and then there is the stylized character workflow, exactly. And then there is rain. Hold on. The final renders, exactly, over here. So I made this final rendering setup, lighting setup. This is what I want to create for snow as well. And ideally in a way that I could put them both side by side. That would be the ideal scenario. But I also rendered this from different angles, which is basically also just the setup from the turntable. So here, for example, this is how it looks like. Like this is what I want to make for snow as well. This is the same setup, the final lighting with all the materials, all the textures, then at the same time, side by side, every texture stripped so you can see the model, and then also the wireframes added on top so you can see the model even better. Exactly, so I could just minimize this. Mostly it's already all the same stuff going on over here. Now, first thing on the agenda would be to bake the materials down. I have all of this set up, but some of these shaders are only working in Blender. Others, for example, the eyes, I actually generated procedurally from the object coordinates. So if I would actually change the model, like for example dilate the eyes, it would actually break the material. So I want to bake this one down especially. And the same with all the other materials. So I'm just going to put this back into a T-pose. It's actually interesting to see all the adjustments that I've made over the streams. I tweaked the model still a bit further. Like that. Okay. And before I get into that, I'm just gonna quickly look at the chat. There's some more questions. But if you reset an n-gon or try, then the borders of the poly in the UV sphere space are not at the edges of the UV grid, like they're in. That's a good point. That's probably why it looked a bit differently over here. Well, that's a really good point. In that case, it would be a bit tricky to get this to work. So I wonder if that can actually be done still. Like that would be nice. Would be super nice. Oh. So could I, for example, snap this one over here. This one over here. And the last one over here in the middle. It's a bit strange. Maybe it would still look okay. Hold on. I'm actually really curious about this now because it is true that this is posing somewhat of a challenge, but it seems to work. The UV points to the edge. Hold on. Yeah, as long as you snap them to the edge of the UV space, it should still work, but over here it starts to fail if not subdivided. That's interesting. Yeah. So as long as you subdivide it, seems to work. Well, I think this is also where UV smoothing is becoming really important. So if you change this to keep boundaries, or none. Huh. Huh. You might be onto something there. I think I need to figure this out, how it would actually work for n-gons. Seems to break a bit. Good point. But if you have a quad-only mesh, it should be fine. Yeah. Anyway, let's first get into baking. I don't have that much time, and I want this to be the last stream. So, I'm just gonna move over to this workspace over here. Move this over. And this is going to be the image editor. Perfect. So I will actually start with a shirt. Let's start with something relatively uncomplicated. Okay. So the way how I set up baking is, I actually wanted to use some add-ons for this, but there's always some limitations with it, and I need to tweak this manually to get some better performance out of this, and to also bake on UDIMs, which is still not fully supported. I didn't know that. So baking is using the same settings as the rendering. So, but it's not really like your render settings are probably not optimized for baking. So I will usually change the samples over to something really low. Let's just say 50. Because to bake something, I want to clearly define what part of the material I want to bake. Since I have all three inputs over here already defined as base color, roughness, and bump, I'm just going to shift click on this, and this is my base color. It's perfect. Since it's by control shift clicking on this, it will plug it into an emission shader. I will need to bake emit. That's the bake type. I leave usually the margin at 8 pixels, so it's going to bake beyond the UV islands 8 pixels further. That will usually result in less like visible borders along the seams if you zoom out. And the rest I could just basically leave like that. I don't need selected to active because I'm just baking it onto the same object. And the output is an image texture, 8 pixels, clear image, that's fine. And the last thing I usually do is I increase the tile size on both directions to 4K. It's kind of insane. Like, I don't exactly understand why this works. I would need to talk to someone with more technical knowledge, but the bigger the tile size, the more optimized the baking process will be. It's just running on the CPU, and apparently if it has an insanely large tile size, it will just get done faster. So if you set it to something insane like 4K, it will bake it in an instant essentially. Then I have, okay, last thing I need to do, I'm going to duplicate this. And this is the texture that I want to bake it on. So I'm going to select the UV map, that's my main one. And I will create a new texture, which is called just, well, shirt bake. Doesn't need to be the final texture. I don't want to cause any like already make some final naming in the Blender file. I just want something to bake to. So 200, wait, yeah, 2046. Is that right? No, hold on. Math. 2048. No alpha, please. Just yeah, I think this should be fine. I'm gonna click OK, and now I just need to click on this to make the texture active. So Blender knows this is the texture that I want to bake to. Now I am seeing what I'm going to bake, and I have the texture selected that I want to bake to. And then the last thing left to do is really just to click on, hold on, click on bake. I have the texture over here on the side visible. So if I click on bake, oh, select the object, bake. And now it should be done it should be done pretty fast. I hope so. I'm gonna quickly go over the chat in the meantime. What is bake? Okay, so that's actually a good question. So I explained it a bit vague earlier, but essentially what I'm doing is I'm gonna just turn down the music a little bit for myself. What I'm doing is I have this huge node network that is generating the base color, the roughness, the bump, and all of that, but you are not going to be able to export that to another software. So the process of baking it is to flatten it down to a single texture, or like a set of textures, so that they can just be put onto the object via a single UV map, and that's all you need. That's basically it. And I see that the baking process is going to take forever. And it's also baking it wrong. Let me quickly check out the UV map. This is the UV map that I want to bake to. It's called UV map. It's set as rendered. Then why is it doing this? That was not expected to happen. That's strange. But yes, in the end, I can actually show it to you on Rain, to be honest. Let me just open up another Blender while this is baking. And I'll just quickly open up Rain. So I have Rain over here. Let's just use, I don't know, rain.blend. This is the actual rigged version of the character. But if I go to a material view, it's loading up all the textures. It's gonna be there in a moment. There we go. Yes. Now, the interesting bit is that in this case, there's not a very complex shading network. Like you can see for the body, it's just two textures. And those are the ones that I baked. If I Control-Shift-Click on this, this is the diffuse texture. This is the roughness. I plug the diffuse texture into this node to get subsurface scattering color, and that's it. Now, if I check out the images over here, you can see that they are just baked down to a single image. This is the diffuse color. For snow right now, and also for rain originally, I had this split up into multiple textures and nodes and various influences. Baking down the textures into, baking it down into a single texture is the same as in Photoshop or in Krita. You have like a huge hierarchy of layers, and you're just flattening it to one single layer, or you're just like, you have your huge layer system and then you're just exporting it as one single image. So that's basically the process of baking. I hope that kind of explains it. Are there tutorials on baking? I see someone ask on the Blender Cloud. Sorry if it's been asked before. It's actually a good question. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. I would like to add one if possible. Wow. Maybe Simon added one in his shading tutorial, but I'm not sure about that. Okay. Yeah, and this is the downside of baking. You can see that with the shading network, I basically got for, like with not a lot of effort, or not a lot of trade-offs, I got basically an infinite amount of resolution. Like you can really zoom in and there's like a lot of it. But for the baked texture over here, it's getting blurry. It's not as high res. But it's a trade-off that's worth it if... well, you can always increase the resolution. Or in this case, I could, for example, still keep the... theoretically keep... Now I can't keep the tileable... yeah, I mean, there could be different solutions, but in this case, I just want to bake it down to a single texture. That's fine by me. So I'm actually going to save this texture with Shift-Alt-S. I'm going to go to Maps and make a new folder called Bake. And this is Shirt Diffuse. Like that. Now, the same thing for the roughness. So I'm just gonna click on Bake once more. And I'm actually going to watch for a moment how fast this actually was. Yeah, you can see it's like really going through the bar over here pretty fast. Now it would definitely be faster on a lower resolution texture, but that's fine. There we go. And I can Alt-S save this as shirt roughness. And I'm basically going to continue like that. Here, I need to do it a bit differently. Huh. I'm actually going to Control-Shift-Click on the material, and I'm going to change it to, let's see, normal, normal. A tangent normal space, the defaults, and I'm gonna click on bake. Hopefully this is also still fast. I see someone ask how to bake several channels into one image at the same time. It's probably something you would need to do afterwards. It's not really officially supported, but to be honest, I would personally then do it afterwards in an image editing software. I would just bake out the... I mean, you could actually do it in Blender, but you would have to create a another shader, another material where to then mix it to, and then you would again need to bake it out, or you would need to do it via compositing and then render it out. You can do it in Blender, but it's still a separate step. There's also another question. Are you guys part of the official Blender software? Yes, although we're not really tied to the software development part. We're at the Blender studio. We're mostly artists working at creative projects like open movies and educational content. So it's still tied to the software development. We're like, I mean, I kind of like to call us just crash test dummies, or like we're basically testing the software as it's being developed. But that's about it. Yeah, providing feedback, maybe some design work, but not active development. There's also another question. Would be rad if you could click a button to bake all the inputs at the of the shader node. That is true. Like, I want to try out the add-on that Daniel Beistedt made. Like, it's really new. It's a free add-on online, and it actually lets you add the channels and then bake them at the same time. The problem that I found out with that is that you're creating these channels based on the officially supported baking types, and that's not what I want. In this case, I want to specifically define the inputs from the shader, and that's still something that should be supported at some point. Okay, so finished baking, and this is the normal map. I can save this as well. Just call this normal. And this is RGB, save as image, bam, done. And now I can save this. Now, just to kind of test this, I would like to duplicate this shader. I'm gonna make this the active one. And let's just import the maps. So I'm gonna have the shirt diffuse. There we go. And the shirt roughness and the shirt normal. Oh, oops. There we go. And then I can plug this in directly in here into the base color, into the roughness, and with a little bit of an extra trick, I need to get a normal map node, plug this into the color, and then this into the normal. Now this is not exactly what I expected. Ah, this is why this needs to be set to non-color. Then it should work. Nice. Now, I want to compare this. And you can see it's basically exactly the same, only that the baked version is a bit lower res, and the original has a higher resolution. But I managed to bake this, hold on, like this entire shader network with different node groups and all of this stuff that you could not use in any other software. You can't just export this. Like for example, if you would want to show this model on Sketchfab, any like online platform where you could just, or any other software essentially, you would need to bake this down. And this is why this is nice to have. It's lower resolution, but it's way simpler. And this is what I would then continue to do for all the other materials. Now, the one where this is becoming a bit difficult is the skin, and I'm going to get into that in a moment. Why? But first, let me actually get back to the comments for a bit. So first question, sir, is it okay if I don't bake my procedural texture? Will it slow down the rendering process? That's the thing for rendering. To give you an example for the current movie production that we're doing in SpriteFright, we have a lot of procedural nodes, and it's actually not putting a lot of extra memory usage or any stress or longer render times on the production. Like, we have almost all of it procedural, and we're not baking down anything. And for using that in cycles, it's completely fine. It's actually better. So you're not really losing anything there. I would say that the aspects where baking down the materials is really beneficial is if you're heavily using a lot of procedural nodes in Eevee, which takes a long time to load, or if you want to use your assets in another software. Like for example, Substance Designer is there to create really complex materials procedurally via node systems, but in the end, it's getting baked down to single images. There's another question. I want to purchase a PC for freelancing in Blender. I have low budget. I have to save up for high-end systems. So do I get recommended specs for Blender systems for rendering animations? I think there are some recommended specs online, but I'm not sure. For rendering, that's definitely where you need the specs for, but I would say for just generally working on assets, you don't need a high-res, a high-tier computer. You can get away with having low specs for a lot of it. I would say what gets really tricky is if you want to do like some really high detail, high-res sculpting or painting, or if you want to create huge sets, or if you want to render entire sequences. But for rendering, I would still recommend you can then just as well hire an external render farm or rendering service instead of purchasing a very expensive computer. But that's where you would need to decide what is actually saving you more money. Another question, looks great. If you were to have a logo on the shirt, would you draw it in a separate program or import into the node system? Or do you add a logo on top of the bake? That's actually a good question, because what I would probably do is for the shirt, I would go into edit mode, I would create a new UV map over here, and I would just call this logo. And then I would probably just, like, I have this part of the UVs in the front, and I would just press U and then project from view. And now I have this part just perfectly projected from the front. Like, would be one way of doing it. And then I could just, if I have an image of the logo, I could just plug it in here and align these UVs so that the logo appears in the middle. And all the other UVs, I could just scale them down to 0 and move them somewhere here in the corner where the logo wouldn't appear. And then I could just plug this into the shading network for the material. It's like one way of doing it. But you could also paint it in the program, but to be honest, I would rather just import a high-res logo from another software where it's easier to create. There's another question. Are you guys using Cycles or Eevee to render sprite fright? We're using Cycles. I don't think there's anything where we're using Eevee. Eevee is really mainly used for material pre-visualization, texture painting, and that's about it. There's another question. How long will it take to master Blender? Well, that's a tricky one, because Blender is such a huge software. You've never learned everything. So I've been using Blender for 10 years and I don't know everything. So it's I don't know how to answer that. Just try to, if you want to master something specific that you want to do in Blender. I don't think you're able to master everything within a reasonable amount of time. Another question, will the character be available with both baked and procedural textures? That's a good one. I would say I might actually try to set up the materials in a way that the procedural system is used for cycles and the baked system is used for Eevee. But what is more likely to happen, to not have the materials load forever, because they need to load two separate material setups at the same time, I would probably, in the final asset, have the baked versions, and on the cloud, on the Blender cloud, you can find the original shading networks as well and download them. And then you can, if you want, use those materials. You can just transfer them over to the final character. Another question, is Blender free? Yes, it's free and open source, and that's not gonna change. Anyway, I was going to bake the textures of the body, which is actually a bit more tricky, because if we look at the UV map, we can see it's actually using, hold on, it's using 3 UDIMs. So that's making things a bit more complicated. Right. So just looking at this, we essentially, to bake everything down, I want to get more resolution out of the entire body. The head over here, the body over here, and the hands over here. So this enables me to have one texture for the head, one for the body, one for the hands, and they can have their own resolution. I get more detail out of it. But baking this down on these 3 different textures is actually a bit tricky, because I could try this, where I can make a new texture over here. I'm gonna make this 4K. Oops. And I'm gonna call this head bake. Actually, let's call this bake 4K. And I'm gonna make this. And then there is another one called bake, a shirt bake. And I'm gonna rename this to bake 2K. And I will protect these from accidentally getting deleted at some point, maybe. All right, let's take the base color as an example. So I have the base color over here, lots of detail on the skin, and then less detail on the arms, and basically nothing on the rest of the body because it's never shown. And then again, more detail on the hands. So I want to bake all of that down into 3 different textures. So I still have all the same settings. I would just like change this back to emit. And now, hold on, bake 4K. Let's try this. If I bake this, it will unfortunately only bake it for the first UDIM tile. So in this case, it's only going to bake the textures for the head. I hope this is going to get supported at some point, that you can bake multiple UDIM textures or UDIM tiles at the same time, but right now it's not. So instead I'm going to show you how to work around that. In the meantime, I see some more questions. I wonder how to make a render with a custom background like rain. Is it something to do with compositing? Thank you. Yes, I did that with compositing, because what I managed to do is, how I did it is I set up multiple different render layers, one for the character with a transparent background, and then one with only the background and the character only in the reflections of the ground. So, and by rendering out these 2 separately, I was then able to composite them together with some extra adjustments on the colors and so on. So I'm going to get to that soon. I would actually like to only go over the baking of the UDIMs just to show it, and I'm not going to bake all the textures in the stream. I would rather do this, because it's kind of repetitive, I would rather do this later after the stream, and instead move on over to the lighting and compositing, which is going to be a bit more exciting. And I'm not sure why this is actually taking so long. I know that this is a 4K texture, so it's going to take longer. Essentially, I think 4 times as long, because it's like from a 2K, like double the size in 2 directions means it's 4 times as large, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's another question. There's any student pass to Blender Cloud Access? I'm lack of money at the moment. Sorry. But no, there's no student pass. But it's actually, I mean, it's not that expensive. It's essentially €9 per month. And even with just one single month, you can watch quite a bit of it. You can even download it if you want to watch it another time. So it's all very accessible. It's kind of strange that it's taking so long. Now it's actually baking. I assume that it actually needs to like read the entire material first, and that's taking so long. It's a bit strange. Are there any more questions? Oh, this is strange. Why is it taking so long? It's not supposed to take this long. If I cancel this at 3%, I can at least see the end result of the 3% that were just baked. So I'm curious how this will look. There are some more questions popping up. Why doesn't Blender support AMD cards? It always crashes when I try to render. I'm not sure. To be honest, I'm not using AMD cards, and I'm not that much into the rendering part of things. Another one. This may be a dumb question, but can you get good at game assets without knowing how to draw? Pretty much doing everything in Blender from concept to creation. I think so. I mean, I'm also not the strongest at drawing, but I still can make characters basically from start to finish. So drawing is definitely a good help, and some drawing exercises will definitely help you become a better artist. But for the technical execution especially, you don't really need to learn how to draw. It's not a necessity. Another question. It's quite funny to see a Blender studio artist being surprised that baking takes a long time with Blender. It's true. It's just I'm still a bit I still find it very strange that it's so inconsistent. I felt like I had a workflow kind of figured out that will tremendously speed up the baking process, but now that I increased the texture resolution to 4K, it's again taking insanely long, and even canceling the job right now for some reason took forever. And I think there's something weird going on that when I'm using UDIMs, because now that I look at this, it actually pretty perfectly baked this already at 6%. So there's something weird happening. Something very strange. And yeah, this is also kind of looking strange, of course. Let's see. But yeah, all of this looks pretty good. I'm just gonna export this already and just call this head dot head score diffuse. Oh, oops, I had PNG in the title, and I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna quickly save. There's no way of actually... I think there need to be some extra options for baking with UDIMs. What I suspect is that it's actually going through all the UDIMs anyway, and I fear that this will actually mess up the textures. So let's actually just try to bake the... let's see. Let's try to bake the roughness. Okay. Here's an idea how I could optimize this. So, oh boy. It's actually still has to bake thing over here. So this is basically the only object that I have with UDIMs, and I'm just going to duplicate it like that. And I'm going to move it into a new collection over here called Bake. There we go. And I'm now just only going to show this one. And now what I want to do is I'm going to split up the object based on these 3 UDIMs. So I'm going to select all of this and have, hold on, I'm going to select all of this. Now I have all the hands selected, and I'm going to press P, separate selection. And now the same thing with the body. I'm going to select all of this, Control L just to make sure everything connected is selected, P, separate selection. So now I have all these 3 materials which will get baked. I just need to make sure that with the subdivision, it shouldn't, it should keep the corners. Oh. There we go. Just in case. Because then the it's basically going to look exactly the same over here. Wait. Oh, this gets not recognized as a corner? That's sad. Well, maybe it's not that bad. Okay. Because it's only baking to itself anyway. So. Now, the UVs are now only this UV island. If I go to this one, I'm going to press G. And I'm going to move this over with -1 to the first UV island, and with the hands exactly the same, -2 over on the x-axis. And now all of these have their UVs in this 1x1 space where we're actually going to bake the textures. So this should make it a bit easier, and maybe, well, hopefully the baking also faster. So let's save this. And now I will bake the roughness once again. Just make sure, bake. And now this should be faster. There's some more questions that popped up in the chat. Oh, there's a bunch more questions. Why does EV Materials need to compile while Cycles doesn't? Well, that's a... I don't know the technical explanation about that, to be honest, but it does. It's kind of interesting. I hope that gets resolved at some point, that at least the compiling is faster, or that it at least remembers what changed in the material and what didn't, so it has always a partial compile on the side and doesn't always need to recompile the entire shader network. But I'm sure that can be worked on. There's another question. Since you're baking emission, render samples are really just anti-aliasing, so maybe it's worth lowering the samples. That's what I did. I have it down to 50, actually 30. And I think 30 is basically the minimum amount that I would want to use. I wonder if denoising makes a difference. I don't think it's going to denoise for baking, but I haven't baked ever since denoising has become an official feature, so maybe someone else knows more about this. Does the baking process use the denoising settings? There's another question. Hold on. What's the difference between Blender and the other software in animation? Is the animators don't animate realistically? I don't talk about Blender Studio animators. I'm not sure which other software you mean. The other softwares in animation. Well, I mean, there's like a bunch of little differences, sometimes in features, sometimes in how the rigs work. But to be honest, I'm not an animator, and I haven't animated a lot in other pieces of software. I animated a little bit in Softimage and in Maya, but that's a while ago. Why is it taking so long? This is very unusual, especially because I still think that right now, if I cancel it, it's actually going to have baked the entire thing. Maybe I actually need to lower the tile size a little bit. Maybe that will help. It's not very transparent on why this is happening. There's some more questions. The movies you guys work on, are they entirely done in Blender, including the compositing effects, etc.? Yes. We're doing it all in Blender. Except for some other tasks like 2D painting that can also sometimes be done in like other software like Inkscape and Krita and GIMP. But generally we're only using open source software for the production. There's some more questions. You happen to know if it's possible to get high-res vertex colors through the multi-res modifier? No, it's not possible yet. Or at least if you mean to paint higher resolution vertex colors on the layers of the multi-res. That's not possible. Would be great if it's supported at some point. Can anyone suggest me some courses for Blender 2.79? Oh. I'm not sure. I mean, I would say like there's many more courses for 2.79 out there than 2.8, especially on CG Cookie, CG Boost, CG Masters. I don't know, there's like a lot of websites that use CG in their titles. This is so strange. 6% and it's done with the baking. I'm not exactly understanding what's happening here. Maybe someone else has already experienced this, but this is very strange. I'm gonna turn off sampling and I'm gonna turn down the tiling a bit more. And now I'm gonna bake the subsurface scattering color and see what happens. And I'm just gonna, oh wait, yeah, I'm just gonna press bake. Are there some more questions? Whenever I try to bake a canvas for dynamic paint, my Blender crashes with no errors. That's strange. Yeah, maybe you can report that, especially if you can easily reproduce it. If it's very easy to get that crash and show it to people, then developers can fix it really easily. Yeah, the baking process for some reason gets stuck at 3%. And now if I would stop, I think it's actually done. So that's kind of annoying. I see the question, what's the best way to make lens flares look good? I'm not sure, I'm actually not doing lens flares that much. Sorry, it's much easier to answer questions that are more related to what is happening right now. Yes, okay, so right now it's 10%. If I would cancel here, at least it's faster now. That's something, but I think there's something wrong because now if I cancel, I think it's actually, it takes a while to cancel. It's done, it's finished. I'm not sure what's happening. Let's make the tiles really small and click bake again. See what happens. Yeah, now the baking process is again really slow. If I would stop the baking now, yeah, we can see it's actually not finishing it. Oops. Oh, wait. And if I click bake again, Maybe it has to do with the hardware specs, but at least I kind of showed how I could split up the UDIMs into multiple objects and then bake the results. The only issue that I could see there is with if you're baking something like a normal map, it might actually make the seams visible, like essentially the borders of the split geometry. So for normal map baking, I would maybe look for a different solution, or at least keep one of these outer loops included, and then maybe it works. See the comment, I dare you to bake one sample. I'm actually going to try it. That would be fascinating if that actually leads to a good result, but I guess I don't think so. But how low can I get? One sample. Bake. Let's see what happens. There's another question. Are the diffuse textures hand-painted or procedural? They are a bit of both. I painted some textures and vertex colors as like an influence, and then I mixed those with procedural textures. So I could define where all the pores are and what color is used where, and then that's basically a mask for basically using a certain procedural texture at a certain spot. To be honest, this is not looking so bad. I actually want to see the difference. So there's diffuse 1 and 2. So what if what if I get the diffuse map over here and the diffuse 2 over here, and I compare them. I don't know why I'm not doing this. It actually doesn't seem to make any difference. Okay, okay. Let's do that. Let's try that. Okay, I have the subsurface scattering. I'm gonna set the tiles to 2K. Actually, let's keep it at 1K. So at least seem to 2K it is, and then samples on 1. And I'm going to bake out the subsurface scattering color. Some more questions. Try to refresh Blender. Hope that solves baking problems. Wait. It didn't. Oh, it didn't bake. Another question. Are you sure baking is using view samples, not render samples? It shouldn't use view samples, viewport samples. It should always use render samples. There's no reason why it should not. Another one. Where do I go to get help with the dynamic paint problem? Sorry for the properly obvious question. I would say make a bug report. Oh my god, it's super fast. This is insane. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna do this. This color. Save. And the subsurface scattering and bake. So yeah, the whole thing of using one sample is actually a nice solution. What the hell? If this is actually causing problems that I'm not aware of, please let me know. I can't see any of them right now. This is actually really working well. Nice. One sample. But I can see this only working for emit, I would say. Probably. Like, or at least I could see it working for almost all inputs except for something like ambient occlusion or a combined render pass. For that you would still need higher samples, but yeah, I can see why one sample works for any other single value input, like from the material directly. Okay. Yeah, this is looking great. Now I can quickly go through this. So now I baked everything from the head and I can move on to the body, where I essentially have the same thing. Only here I want to bake it on a 2K texture. So I can bake the diffuse color and check the chat. There's a great add-on that came out recently for baking called the Juliens Blender Baker. Yeah, I mentioned it before. It's actually really good, but it's for some reason not quite working so well for this case. What's going on over here? Oh, I have the mask modifier enabled for rendering. That's why the rest is black, because the mask modifier actually hides all of these parts. Oops. Okay, let's hit bake again. Let's try this again. Yeah, with a bicep baking add-on, I need to... What? I need to figure out some issues that I had with it. Another comment, maybe use like a couple of samples at least. It's gonna be better in terms of anti-aliasing alongside noise, I think. That's a good point, but I didn't even notice any anti-aliasing issues. I should fact check that with the pants, for example. Anything that has a high frequency detail texture, and where I could actually see the anti-aliasing effect. So I'm gonna do that. So yeah. Why can't I delete this? Wait, weird. Okay. Well, body, diffuse, PNG, save. And basically then it continues like that. That's the idea. But just to fact check on the whole thing of... Hold on. Okay. So it worked over here for the shirt with the higher samples. Let's try how it looks like on the pants. And that's basically the last thing that I'm going to do for baking, because I'm almost out of time. It's a bit sad. Well, in that case, I am at least showing that it's the last part of the shading by baking everything down. The lighting is a bit of an extra. But yes, there's lots of detail here. Really zooming in, and lots of detail. So let's actually duplicate this. Use the main UV map. And over here I'm gonna I'm gonna also bake it down to a 2K texture, see how it looks. Okay, I'm setting this as active. I only have 2, wait. Okay, I have 3 inputs that I need to bake. The diffuse color. I'm gonna start with this. Well, actually, I'm gonna start with a bump. I think there I can really see the anti-aliasing effect. So let's change this over to normal. Use the material, click on the texture, save, and I'm gonna bake. See what happens. Are there any more comments? I think one sample is pretty standard for cycles baking from the tutorials I've seen, someone says. That would be very reassuring. I've never done it with one sample. So, and Falk is saying, I think you can test how many samples you need by using the viewport render. That is actually a really good point. Also, someone else is saying, is this the last live stream from Blender Studio? Not the last one per se, but I want to be this one. I want this one to be the last one for the creation of snow. Once the shading is done, the character creation is complete. I'm baking down the materials, I'm cleaning them up a bit, and then I have the final character model, essentially. I've made all the adjustments I wanted to do. The last thing that needs to be done is rigging the character, and that's no longer in my hands. If someone else wants to do some live streams, they can do it. After this one, I'm going to focus a bit more on other things, like I wanted to make a recap video for all of the things that I've done during the live stream, and before that, everything related to the character creation of this character, Snow. And I wanted to add a bit more content to the tutorials, to the course, the character creation, the stylized character workflow on the Blender Cloud. And after that, there's going to be other things like breakdowns, and production lessons based on my work on Sprite Fright. So I'm going to move on to other tutorial content and in general other content for the Blender Cloud, and possibly also this YouTube channel, but it's not going to be live streams. And then at some point, if I want to live stream something else, I can do it, but I don't think I'm gonna do it that regularly anymore. Unless I really feel like spending the time for it, if it makes sense. Okay. I see some... Thanks for the comment. Thanks for doing these live streams. Been fun and educational. I'm glad. This oh boy, what's it doing? I'm baking it to the wrong material. The wrong UV map. Hold on. I'm actually going to test this. So let's actually show the normal on one viewport sample. I mean, this is not looking good, but if I would show the diffuse color with one sample, this would also not look good. It would look like this. Is it done? No. Now it's done. Yeah, I mean, anti-aliasing is probably going to be the problem with this. Yeah. but maybe that is less of an issue for baking. I could see that. Anyway, I wanted to bake this again. Bake. This time to the correct UV map. Another comment. How long have you been working on Snow? Do you have any idea how many hours it took? Great work, by the way. You're awesome. You're an awesome artist. Thank you. I didn't get to work a lot on Snow. It happened a lot over time. So I would say the character was created over the course of like, oh boy. Yeah, here we can really see the lack of anti-aliasing. So if I change this to 30 samples. Hold on. Pants, normal. If I change this to 30 samples and bake again, we will be able to see the difference. I started creating the character last year in June. So that's a long time ago. But there was a long stretch of time where I didn't get to finish the character. In June, I spent like 1 week, or no, I spent like 2 weeks on creating the concept, the sculpt, and the expression testing, and then the final pose. Maybe it has. I think maybe it's been 3 weeks. Common skin pants normal. Yeah, I need to fix the naming. Oh god. That's not right. But overall, in terms of hours, I couldn't tell. I mean, it's very easy to count the amount of hours that I've live streamed the character. And it's been taking a while. But no, I can't tell right now how long. There's some more comments. If you're baking a normal and object was duplicated and is in the same position, even if you hide the duplicate texture, texture will be black. Well, not necessarily. It's a lot depending on what you're baking to what. Like if you're baking everything that is around an object to the active object, then yeah, it's gonna maybe end up as black or some weird results like that. But in this case, I'm only baking the material from the active object to the active object. So it's completely ignoring everything else that's in the 3D viewport. It's only looking at the one object. Yeah, this baking is taking a while. But I'm pretty sure, I'm convinced that doing one sample for normals, for normal map is a bad idea. But one sample for like normal, like just color maps, it seems to work fine. So I'm not sure. Let's go to maps bake. I'm gonna rename this to pants normal. There we go. That makes more sense. I mean, this was baked now with, yeah. Maybe this actually makes no difference. These are single pixel values, and it's already, like, this is a lot of noise. Like, looking at this, you can't really make out any texture detail. This is actually very fine detail. So now, once I baked out the newer version, it should actually look the same. We'll need to check that. Some more comments. Do you have experience with baking diffuse maps from AO, normal, and albedo? Of making diffuse maps from AO, normal, and albedo? Well, I mean, it's like I call it diffuse over here in the material, but realistically it is an albedo map. I don't quite differentiate between them, to be honest. I know the difference, but in the diffuse textures that I paint or create, I usually already create, put a bit of ambient occlusion or a bit of lighting information in it, if it makes sense. Especially when the character is stylized, or like simplified to some extent. Okay, the bake is almost done. Let's zoom in, see what happens. Over here, maybe. Yeah, it looks different. It looks way different. So, pans normal 2. Let's see. I wish it would actually switch between them. Oh man. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna control. Oh, non-color. There we go. Oh. Well, if I want to see the difference, I should do it like that. Yeah, that is a stark difference. Yeah, one sample is not a good idea for normal maps. It's really not. Well, that explains it. Well, but in this case, now I would just stop with the whole baking and actually get back to what I was doing before. So, well, what I wanted to actually continue with. So, let's see. So I did some adjustments over here to the hair, for example, pushing this a bit further into the head so that there's not much of an edge that's catching light or shadow. And then I changed a bit of this shape. There's also other adjustments that I did, like the seam over here is way less down the sleeve. And I want to have these changes also into the in the pose, so I will need to fix that. So for that, I'm going to delete this. Oh, clear the keyframes. I'm actually going to make this the new base. Same thing over here. This is the adjusted version. Make this the new basis. I think what this should do is it should actually fix Nope. Didn't actually fix it. It's a bit of a strange issue with shape keys. I wish there would be an easier way of changing how it works. There we go. That's the adjustments that I made. Then I go to the next one, and this is causing some issues if it's enabled. also see some more comments. Can you can anyone upload tutorial on the Blender Cloud, or is there anything to do first? Anyone? I'm not sure what you mean. Do you know if it's possible to make a specular glossiness PBR shader in Blender? Yeah, it's possible. I mean, there's plenty of shader nodes to be able to do that. Another comment, Julien Kaspar, I will miss you very much. Thank you. Well, I'm not gone. I'm still gonna make new stuff and show my face from time to time. I'm not sure if there's actually a good way of fixing this, to be honest. I will fix this another time with a shape key. That it's also, these changes are also appearing in the pose. But for now, I have the turntable and I have a lighting pass over here, but I'm gonna call this lighting turntable. I'm actually gonna put it in the same collection. Now, first off, I want to I think I'm actually going to do something that will save me some time, and I will actually go over the rain lighting setup and compositing setup a bit and copy it mostly, because then it's at least a bit in sync with snow. So this is the original rain lighting file, and over here we can see the final object, the pose, the objects, the materials. It's all there. And it already has a world shader as well, and it's pretty simple. It's really just the default forest EXR from Blender, and that one is kind of like mixed in with the hue saturation value node to kind of make something different out of it, and that is then with a low intensity plugged in so that we can see it here. It's just providing a bit of extra fill light. Now, after that, I added a lighting setup, which is, if I go over here to cycles, it'd be easier to see. Interesting, why is, I'm gonna exclude this. Awesome. Okay, I'm actually going to also show the denoising. There we go. Okay, so this is a fairly simple 3-point lighting system, but with some extra lights added on top. So if I disable all of this, we have the key light over here, which I actually split up into diffuse and specular. I think I did that for Eevee specific reasons, but there's no big reason to do that again. But yeah, a key light, simple, just slightly warm, coming from one side over here, casting some nice shadows. And then I added in some rim lights. No, there's like some bounce lights over here, which are supposed to like give off some red and blue light from the environment over here, which makes it a bit more interesting. Some nice color contrast together with the diffuse. It's subtle, but this is mainly coming together with the rim light. So I got a blue rim light over here from this side, actually multiple ones, which are all just kind of illuminating different parts of the body, where I have like pretty good control over where all of these lights are coming from and what shadows they're casting. And then I got one rim light over here in red, which is a bit more subtle. So all of these rim lights together with some softer light to fill in the silhouette a bit more. And then the key light. And then the fill light is really just coming from the environment. And then I added also a little light blocker over here, which is something very common. We do it a lot in the movie productions, which are then just like simple planes. And they are in the ray visibility tab over here. We disable everything except for shadow. And these are really just meant to cast a shadow. In this case, I wanted the rim light to be gone on the scarf. Like that. And that just already helped a lot. So you can kind of tweak the lighting that way in very specific ways. So I'm basically going to copy this setup almost completely for snow. And in addition to that, I had, like this is the entire collection for the character lighting. I actually lit the eyes separately and composited them on top, but that was because of kind of poor shading decisions, I think. They're kind of overblown white over here. So if I go over here to this render layer over here for eyes, different collections are excluded and included. And now I only have the eyes rendered over here. The way how this works is there's actually two more render settings over here called holdout and indirect only. What this does is the body of rain over here is being rendered normally, but what I can do is I can select this, I can set this button to be on, and now the body is actually acting as, like it's always going to be rendered as alpha 0. It's always going to be rendered as transparent, and making everything that is behind it also transparent. That's how you could see it. The same thing for the hair and the clothes. So now I have only the eyes with some more fine tweaked lighting. And then I added this on top via compositing. And then similar thing with the background. I have it right here. And this is really just the floor. I have, for this, I made a sphere, which is really just like a single color over here. It's just a color ramp in an emission node. So it's actually a bit brighter on top and a bit darker at the bottom. So otherwise there's nothing catching the reflections. The only other thing here is this ground plane over here. And this is something I modeled a bit with some extra wave, some modifiers that I had on here that were adding these little droplets on the surface via modifiers. I think I used a wave modifier for that. Or I think it's called a ripple modifier, I'm not sure. Let me check. It's a wave modifier. So I just placed little empties at these spots and used them as locations for where these ripples are supposed to happen. And then this just has like a purely glossy material, just giving reflections, and it's then fading out towards the background with I think I made a vertex color. Yeah, this is like basically acting as a mask. This is where it's glossy, this is where it's transparent. And then I'm really just mixing in these two different materials together over here. Like that. It's fairly simple. The reason why rain actually gets caught in the reflections but is not visible is again because of these little buttons over here. These ones. There is indirect only. And if those are toggled on, what happens is that anything that is indirect only is a light ray. Basically how how anything in 3D is being lit. It's like the camera is shooting light rays and those are then bouncing around. It's basically acting like real light. And then those eventually, like they get, give the render the information of what is being lit and how. But if it's indirect only, that means that that the first bounce is being ignored. The first bounce is not shown for the camera. So a light ray is being shot from the camera, hits an object that is not appearing in the render, only what is then bounced around afterwards. So if the body and the eyes and the clothing and the hair, all of that is indirect only, that means that only the second, the third, and the fourth, and the fifth bounce of those light rays will appear in the render. In this case, the reflection. It's a bit of an interesting trick of how to have certain objects only appear in reflections and refractions, but not in the render. And I'm gonna drink something. So, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to snow over here. I'm actually going to append, hold on. I actually don't have that much time left, so if you want to know a bit more about the compositing side, you can go over here. Oh yeah, so this is the final render. You can just get rid of this original paint over. And what it's doing is, if I would just render this real quick, let's try this. I'm actually going to lower the resolution to 30% and the sampling to, ooh boy, 100. Just so I can actually show this still. So it's going through all of this. First rendering the character, then it's rendering the eyes, and then it is rendering the background with the reflection. And then it's compositing everything on top. So if I go over here to the render result, you can see it right here. And if I Control-Shift-Click over here on, so we got these two different render passes over here. I'm using an alpha overnode to put the new eyes on top of the old. I'm then using an RGB curve, blur, glare, and all of that to add some glow to it, and then color adjusting it a little bit over here. And then for the background, this is the raw render. And I'm just like adding a bit of more blue into it. And I actually have some box masks over here, which I then add together. I blur them, and this just gives me like a simple gradient, which I can then use to adjust the colors over here. And this is basically what I'm doing multiple times with ellipses and boxes, and just getting this kind of color variation in here. With some extra vignettes and some gradients, and this is how I basically created the background. And then again, I have the character, and I'm just using an alpha overnode to put it on top of the background, and that's it. The reason why I added all of this, all of these gradients separately via compositing is it's, for one, it's kind of easier to do it this way. I have more control over it after I rendered everything final, and I then was also able to just put them side by side. If I go to Firefox over here, because then I was able to do this. I just made the whole render wider, and I put all 3 characters side by side using a bit of a gradient to well, to put them side by side, adding transparency between them, like just so I can have them right here side by side. That's, yeah. Sorry. Not explaining this super well. But doing this in compositing is easier. That's basically it for that. So... come on. I wonder... Can I copy this compositing setup to Snow over here? That would be fantastic. So let's say I go over to compositing. Use nodes. And can I select all of this? That would be fantastic. Control C. Go over here. Control V. Clipboard is empty. Does anyone know in what data block this is stored? I hope it's not in the scene. Let's say I go over to Rain. Render. It's not the node tree network. Could be the scene. There's also some more comments. How can I use both GPU and CPU both at the same time in render? You can toggle them on and off in the System tab in the Preferences of Blender. There's another question. How have I watched the entire series till now, and I just want to say that what you taught and made is invaluable. Amazing work. Thank you. Sorry that I'm brushing over it a bit fast right now. Then there's another comment. Why choose the names that you did for them? Rain, Snow. Next gonna be Hail. Well, 2 funny things about that. Hail already exists. It's the main character of the open movie Coffee Run. There we actually named the 2 main characters Hail and Sunny, because they were based on these characters, or like somewhat. Sunny was like a first version almost. Rain was essentially used for an open movie and then just heavily adjusted in shading. So we named her Hail to avoid confusion. But the reason why we went for those names is because originally when we concepted this series, we like the whole tutorial part, it was based on 2 different courses. It was the Stylized character workflow for the character creation, and then the animation fundamentals course for the animation part. And the first character that we made, Hjalti and I, for the animation course, was I think we actually just called him something like Cloud, because it's all made for the Blender Cloud, so we wanted to make the names weather themed, which is kind of a gimmick, but it worked. I think the names are kind of nice. So then the first character of the lineup officially became Rain. That's the name we decided on. And then it was clear that for the next character we wanted to make something similar. So we decided that Snow would be nice, just as a nice counterpart. And then there's another comment. I don't think it's possible to copy paste nodes between the files, unfortunately. Really wish I could do it with my compositing nodes. Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure how I'm gonna do this. I think I'm just gonna append the entire scene. Because if I now go here to the compositing tab, I have the nodes. And maybe I can just copy this now, go to this scene and paste it. Okay. So you can copy and paste between separate scenes within the same blend file, but you can't do it from blend file to blend file. So now I actually have the compositing part in Blender. I just need to make the view layers. So this is V general. This is what I'm going to use for anything else. And then I'm going to make a new view layer called R character. Just exclude all of this. Make another blank one called R background. Okay. So I still have all of these same settings. I'm going to reuse some of these. Quite a bit of these, probably. Okay. I need to define which render layers are being used here. Scene, and then our character over here, and our background. The reason why I'm using V and R is because then I know which view layer over here is used for rendering and which one is for just viewport display. Because if I go over here in the outliner, I can show all view layers, and here we can see all three now at the same time. I'm gonna make the V general not renderable. So this is not being rendered, never will be. And instead our character and our background will be rendered. If I open these up, you can actually see what is being shown as visible over here, which is really nice. So over here I can make different things visible and excluded. So that's where view layers are really useful. So now I can go back to V general. Actually going to go to R character. This is the one I wanted to use. Okay, so I'm gonna make a new collection. Actually, I'm gonna turn this off again, show all view layers. I'm gonna call this lighting. I'm gonna make another collection and call this background. Now in all of these view layers, I could then say, okay, I'm not gonna use these for the general view layer. None of these, but turntable and references, yes. And over here, I'm gonna use lighting. In here, I could have lighting dot character or car and lighting dot bg. So I'm only going to use very certain collections for these. And again, for the background, I'm going to use the entire character only as indirect only. And here for the background, I'm not even going to use it. So like that. And that should basically be the setup I want. Perfect. Now, I'm basically out of time. That's a bit sad. World term tables. Tests. Make a new one. Call this world. Also save this. Perfect. And yes, I'm gonna use the force BG. Very low strength. But yeah, I kind of went over everything I did over here at least. Right. Oh wow. Can I copy these over, please? No? No, I can't. Well, probably I can at least copy a color over to another blend file. Yes, I can. Hue saturation. Saturation was set to 1.4. So I'm mostly copying the same setup. That's at least something. And then basically the only thing I would like to make do differently is Rain had this mostly blue background, and I would like to make it a bit more desaturated for Snow. Something a bit more grayish, and give him a different ground plane. Instead of having this reflective one that looks like water, I want to give him a bit of like a sparkly one that looks like snow. Or maybe a frozen ground plane. I will experiment with that a bit more. But in the end, it will look kind of similar to this result. And then I would put them also side by side. And that I can more easily do with compositing. I think in that case, what's easier to do is to, because only around Rain over here do we see these ripples. And then if Snow is on the same sort of background color or background, that his ground plane will have a bit of a frost effect where he appears with a reflection. So yeah, I would say that's the plan. But I'm gonna end it right here, and I will post more on the progress on what I'm actually doing in the upcoming weeks. It's not much left to do, so I can easily show what's happening and then the final results. And then hopefully soon I will then just publish all the files, and everything will be available on the Blender cloud for you to download. So that shouldn't take too much longer, except for the rig character that will take a bit of time. But I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you another time. Wait, just really quickly going over the comments. I will not go into rigging, sadly. Thanks for the streams. Have learned a bunch. Hope to see more of you on Blender Cloud, Blender Studio. Thank you very much. Well, then I'll just say bye and see you another time. Take care.